Ever wonder how doctors know what kind of bacteria is causing an infection? I mean, we can't see them, right?
Right. Bacteria are way too small to see without a microscope.
So how do they do it?
Well, there are a bunch of different tests.
Okay, but like, what are they actually looking for?
Ah, I see what you mean. They're looking for clues, basically.
Clues.
Yeah, clues that can tell them what kind of bacteria it is, like what kind of byproducts it produces.
Byproducts, like bacterial.poop.
Not exactly. Haha,
Oh.
no. More like waste products from their metabolism.
Okay, that makes more sense.
And one of the tests they use involves something called the Catalase Test.
The Catalase Test. Sounds intense. What's that all about?
Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. It all boils down to bubbles.
Bubbles. We're talking about identifying invisible bacteria, and now we're on to bubbles.
Yep, it's all connected. You see, some bacteria produce this enzyme called catalase.
Enzyme.catalase. Taking me back to high school biology here. Why is this enzyme such a big deal?
It all has to do with how bacteria use oxygen. You know, like we breathe oxygen.
Yeah, of course.
Well, some bacteria use oxygen too. And when they do, they sometimes produce these byproducts, these waste products, called reactive oxygen species. We call them ROS for short.
ROS sounds kind of dangerous.
It can be.
Okay.
ROS can actually damage the bacteria.
Oh, so it's like the bacteria's own metabolism is kind of toxic to them.
Exactly. It's like cellular exhaust fumes.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
So where does the catalase come in?
Catalase is like a detoxifier. It breaks down one of the most common ROS, hydrogen peroxide, into harmless water and oxygen gas.
Wait a minute. Hydrogen peroxide. Like the stuff we put on cuts.
The very same.
Wow, I never realized it was dangerous for bacteria. And you said it breaks down into oxygen. Is that where the bubbles come in?
You got it. When the catalase breaks down that hydrogen peroxide, it releases oxygen gas. And that's what creates those bubbles.
So the Catalase Test is basically looking for those bubbles.
Right. They add some hydrogen peroxide to a sample of bacteria and watch to see if it bubbles.
That's it. Seems pretty simple for something that tells us so much about bacteria.
It is simple. Elegant, even. But powerful.
Uh-huh.
That's the beauty of it. We sent you two sources on this, actually. One is Catalase Test, atlaspage79.pdf,
Yeah.
and the other is catalase-test.pdf.
Awesome. Thanks for the background on this. So if the bacteria are bubbling away, does that mean they're the good kind?
Well, it's not really about good or bad bacteria. It's more about understanding their needs and preferences. You see, catalase-positive bacteria, the ones that produce those bubbles, they're perfectly content in oxygen-rich environments, like our skin, for example.
Makes sense. Our skin is exposed to the air all the time.
But then you have catalase-negative bacteria. They don't produce catalase, so they don't make those bubbles when you add hydrogen peroxide. And that tells us they might prefer living in environments with less oxygen.
So like deep inside our gut where there's not as much oxygen.
Exactly. Or in soil deep underwater, places where oxygen isn't as readily available.
Wow. So these bubbles are like little clues telling us where these bacteria like to hang out. That's wild. And you said this helps doctors diagnose infections.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the big reasons this test is so useful.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Walk me through it. How do those bubbles translate into a diagnosis? So if a doctor takes a sample, adds the hydrogen peroxide, and it bubbles up, they know it's one of those oxygen-loving bacteria.
Right. Like our catalase-test.pdf source talks about Staphylococcus aureus, the bacteria behind staph infections.
Staph infections, those are nasty. So those bacteria are bubbling away on the slide, happy as clams in an oxygen-rich environment.
Exactly. They're well equipped to deal with those reactive oxygen species thanks to their trusty catalase.
But what if there are no bubbles? What does that tell us?
Well, it could point to an infection caused by bacteria that don't love oxygen so much. They don't produce catalase, so no bubble party for them. The PDF source actually gives a good example of this. Enterococcus faecalis.
Enterococcus faecalis. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tongue twister, but it's actually pretty common. Lives in our gut, usually doesn't cause any problems there.
So Enterococcus faecalis, our gut buddy, no bubbles for that one because our gut doesn't have a ton of oxygen just hanging around, right?
Right. It's adapted to a lower oxygen environment. Now, this is important for doctors because it helps them figure out the best treatment.
Oh, I see. So different antibiotics work better depending on the bacteria's oxygen preference.
Bingo. Some antibiotics work best in the presence of oxygen, while others are more effective in environments with less oxygen.
Wow. It's like knowing your enemy, right? If you know they need oxygen, you can target them with the right weapon.
Exactly. It's like strategic warfare, but on a microscopic level.
This is blowing my mind. This tiny little test, just looking for some bubbles, can tell us so much.
It's pretty incredible, right? And it goes beyond just diagnosing infections, too. This knowledge helps us develop new antibiotics.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more. How so?
Well, understanding how bacteria handle oxygen, or don't, gives us clues about their weaknesses.
So we can exploit those weaknesses to develop more effective antibiotics.
Precisely. We can target their specific vulnerabilities based on their oxygen needs.
That's amazing. It's like we're outsmarting these tiny little creatures. But I have to ask, how did we even figure all of this out? Did someone just stumble upon these bubble-blowing bacteria one day?
Uh-huh. I wish it were that simple. It's taken decades of research to get to this point. Scientists have been studying bacteria and their relationship with oxygen for a long, long time.
It makes you appreciate the dedication of those scientists, huh? Years and years in the lab, all for a chance to understand these microscopic organisms.
Absolutely. They're like explorers, venturing into the unseen world of bacteria. And the catalase test, as simple as it seems, has been a vital tool in their journey.
So it's not just a diagnostic tool, it's a window into the history of these bacteria, how they've evolved over millions of years.
Now you're getting it. Think about it. Early Earth, billions of years ago, didn't have much oxygen in its atmosphere.
Right, I remember learning about that. So the early bacteria had to find a way to survive without oxygen.
Exactly. But then, as photosynthetic organisms evolved and started pumping oxygen into the atmosphere...
Some bacteria are like, wait a minute, what's this? Oxygen, we could use that.
Something like that. They adapted evolved mechanisms to deal with this new oxygen-rich world, and those that could use oxygen to their advantage, well, they thrived.
And those that couldn't, maybe they retreated to those low oxygen environments, like our gut, where they still thrive today.
Precisely. So that little bubble, or lack thereof, in the catalase test, it's telling a story that stretches back billions of years.
Wow. I never thought I'd be so captivated by the tale of bacteria and their oxygen adventures. But you know what else blows my mind? The fact that this simple test, which we use to diagnose infections, also plays a role in something as crucial as food safety. I mean, how is that even possible? Food safety. You're really going to connect bacteria bubbles to the food on my plate.
Oh, absolutely. It's all connected. Think about it.
Yeah.
What causes food to spoil?
Bacteria.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And some of those bacteria can be pretty nasty, right?
Yeah, food poisoning is no joke.
So, to make sure our food is safe to eat, we need to know which bacteria are hanging out in there. And guess what can help us do that?
Don't tell me. That catalase test.
You got it. It can be used to quickly identify the presence of certain bacteria in food, especially those that can make us sick.
So the next time I'm enjoying a meal, I should be thanking the catalase test for keeping those bad bacteria in check.
You could say that. It's working behind the scenes to make sure our food is safe. But here's something else to consider.
Okay, hit me with another one of your micro mind benders.
We've talked about the bacteria that thrive with oxygen and those that prefer less of it. But what if we discovered a planet with life, but it had very different oxygen levels than Earth?
Oh, like an alien planet.
Exactly. Imagine finding microbes on that planet and using the catalase test on them.
We could see if those alien microbes produce catalase too.
And that would tell us so much. It could give us clues about the history of that planet, how life evolved there. It's like a cosmic fingerprint.
That's incredible. We could use this simple test, something we use right here on Earth, to potentially unlock secrets of alien life. My mind is officially blown.
It just goes to show you the tiniest things can reveal the biggest secrets. Who knew bubbles could tell us so much?
Right. This deep dive has been full of surprises. So, to sum it all up, the catalase test helps us figure out if bacteria produce the enzyme catalase, which tells us whether they prefer oxygen-rich environments or not.
And that knowledge has huge EE implications, from diagnosing infections and developing new antibiotics to understanding the evolution of life on Earth and maybe even beyond.
All thanks to some tiny bubbles and a whole lot of scientific curiosity. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep exploring the amazing invisible world all around us.